So you pick up your Bible one day and you go to church or synagogue or Bible study and you notice that your friend's Bible doesn't say exactly what yours says. Well, the two were translated differently, and maybe you talk about how many translations of the Bible there are. The RSV, the NRSV, the NIT, the Jerusalem Bible, the World English Bible, the King James of 1411, the New King James, and the list goes on and on and on. Just take a look at the Bible section of your local Barnes & Noble or look it up on Amazon. But the badness does not begin there. Oh no, this madness goes way, way back. If you watched one of the episodes, How the Bible Became a Book, some of that information may be repeated here, but there's loads of new stuff as well. So hang on, because we're about to go a little deeper. But keep in mind that this is actually super simplified. The history is so deep and complicated. The specialists in this field will make your brain melt. I don't want to do that to you. I don't have time to explain Kyge or Theodotion or the Old Latin or any of that stuff. We're going to start here at a basic level. Okay, relatively speaking. Take a deep breath. We're going down. As I noted in the first episode, the Bible did not start out as a book, but rather a bunch of scrolls written down at different times at different places and then copied here and there. Originally, the Hebrew and the Aramaic that the scrolls were written in didn't have vowels, and the alphabet looked a little different too. This is often called Paleo-Hebrew and goes way back, possibly to 1000 BCE. We don't have any biblical texts from that period, but it's just possible that parts of books like Genesis might go back that far. The script evolved, and the earliest biblical scrolls that we have go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But those only date to about the first 100 years or so BCE, or 2100 to 2200-ish years ago, at best. But again, we don't have vowel markings. This is a big deal, because sometimes a word can have two or more possible meanings, depending on those vowel markings. For example, in English, BG could be bag, beg, big, bog, or bug. Very different words with just a change of a vowel. Context sometimes helps, but sometimes it doesn't. This is called the proto-Masoretic or the pre-Masoretic Hebrew text. Now, keep in mind, scrolls were still being written, edited, added to, cut, pasted, copied, and generally messed with, at least up until the 2nd century CE, and probably a little beyond that. In the 2nd century, a translation of the Hebrew texts was made. We only have a little stories about this. Nothing really solid, but the story goes that the king of Egypt at the time, a member of the Ptolemaic family, wanted a translation done into Greek because he was actually Greek. So he called together 72 Jewish scholars to translate their sacred scrolls into Greek. This is called the Septuagint and is often referred to in writing with the symbol LXX, which is 70. In Latin. Yeah, I know, it's not 72 and it's not in Greek. I don't know what to tell you about that. Now, text critics throughout hundreds of years who have way more patience than I, shout out to Emmanuel Tove and Christine DeTroyer, who are modern text critics, are my heroes. They note and analyze problems in this and other texts, trying to figure out what the most original text looked like. When you look closely at some of the texts, you can see where someone's Hebrew or Greek wasn't that great, or they translated the text too literally, or they didn't know a word and maybe transliterated it or translated it wrong, or maybe took liberties with the text and tried to tell us what they thought it meant rather than actually translating what it said. Yeah, it gets really messy. Now, even after this translation into Greek, the Septuagint, the Hebrew texts continued to evolve, and the Greek texts also evolved and changed with time, creating two text traditions. For example, the book of Jeremiah. The Greek text has chapters in a different order from the Hebrew, and the Greek text is about 20 to 30% shorter. What? There are all kinds of differences between the two, from different words and phrases to missing verses to rearranged chapters or verses, then between about 500 and 1,000. Yeah, I know that's not really precise. Again, I don't know what to tell you. We're doing the best we can. About 500 to 1,000, we get what's called the Masoretic text, and that is super exciting. Yes! Because what we get with the Masoretic text are vocalization markings and what you might refer to as freaking vowels. But wait, there's another tradition, that of the Vulgate. In 342-ish CE, the Pope at the time told a guy named Jerome to create a unified Latin Bible. He started with the New Testament for obvious reasons, but also worked on the Old Testament, or what we've been calling the Hebrew Bible. There were already translations, but they weren't really unified, and they weren't all done by a single translator or even a single translation group. So the translations were all over the place. Some were good, some were bad, some were just awful. Remember the problem of people not really knowing Hebrew when they were translating into Greek? The same thing happened here. People not really understanding Hebrew and translating into Latin. So Jerome gets to fix it all. He used several manuscripts, both in Greek and Hebrew, to figure it out and correct the text, but eventually settled primarily on Hebrew as the text that was most accurate. He did not create a book, because there was no book in a final form at that time. The entire book of the Bible, or what we now call the book of the Bible, was still in scrolls. The New Testament has a bit of a different history, but that's another episode. The Masoretic text of the Bible, the Hebrew, with the vowels, this is the primary text used by scholars for the study of the Hebrew Bible today. So, we have, even before King James decided to put the Bible into English, we have the MT, the Hebrew traditions, the Septuagint, the Greek traditions, and then the Vulgate, the Latin traditions. When translators are working to create new translations, they have lots of obstacles to overcome. They have to know ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, ancient Greek, and Latin really well. Even then, there are translational problems, weird words, colloquialisms that are culture-specific, and even jokes that we don't always get. Remember, humor is highly cultural. So the differences between the RSV and the NRSV and the Jerusalem Bible and are totally understandable when you realize that the earliest histories of these texts were every bit as complicated as you can imagine, and probably more so. Remember when I said this was all simplified? Then those translators also have to deal with some material that is inappropriate for family reading. It's just awkward. Or seemingly nonsensical. There are some places we don't know what the words mean. So, take a moment and appreciate the translators. And don't be afraid to compare different translations, and always be brave enough to ask a good question, a hard question, and go looking for the answers. Until next time, have a great week. Don't forget to check out my website, babylondebosons.com, and also check out my other YouTube channel, Ancient Wisdoms. See you later.